When we think about Scottish kings, many of them were warriors and they faced a significant amount of war and turmoil throughout their reigns. They had to deal with the turbulent clan system inside of Scotland, and keeping everyone happy was virtually impossible. Malcolm III was one of the longest reigning Scottish kings of the medieval period, and he reigned for 35 years. He was the maternal grandfather of Empress Matilda, who later was incredibly important in English history, but his kingdom did not extend over the whole of modern-day Scotland. Malcolm III did, during his reign, invade England a number of times, and he managed to secure his lineage on the throne for hundreds of years. However, following his death, his coffin was discovered and his grave was found and opened. But what was found inside was remarkable. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Malcolm was born in the year 1031 and was the son of King Duncan I of Scotland. His father was killed in 1040, but Malcolm did not initially succeed to the throne, and the system at the time was different to how we consider it today. A king was chosen from a different royal line. From Macbeth, the man who Malcolm's father had killed in battle, Lulac, Macbeth's stepson, was selected as the king, and he ruled for only a few months before he was then killed. After this, Malcolm then succeeded as King Malcolm III, the King of the Scots. The line of succession was then changed to Malcolm's own descendants and sons taking the throne on after him. As the King of the Scots, Malcolm was in his 20s when he became the king. Throughout his reign, he led 5 raids into England, and the two nations had previous in raiding and attacking each other. But in England, things were changing a huge amount. Following the Battle of Hastings and the Norman conquest, many English people, especially those in the north, were fleeing into Scotland and were crossing the border. William the Conqueror, the new King of England, laid waste to the north too, in what was known as the harrying of the north, and he even had salt scattered into the fields to prevent people being able to plant crops and thrive in the region again. Malcolm welcomed many people to Scotland, and even Edgar Atheling was brought to Scotland along with his sister. Edgar was a possible claimant to the throne, being the nephew of the previous king, Edward the Confessor. But despite being married before, Malcolm fell in love with one of Edgar's sisters, Margaret, and he then took her as his wife. She said no to his proposal to begin with, as she wanted to become a nun, but the king's persistence paid off, and Margaret of Wessex became his queen. He became more involved in the English throne because of his marriage, but when his brother-in-law joined the uprising in the north of England in 1069, it was not successful and it failed. The English King William then attacked York and burnt many settlements, and the Scottish King Malcolm III had joined in with the uprising. He had for many years claimed Cumbria and Northumberland for the Scots, and he led raids on Bamborough and surrounding areas near to the River Tweed. In Bamborough he took so many prisoners as slaves that it was even claimed that there was an English slave in every home and house in Scotland. But then William I of England would attack north with his forces, and Malcolm had to give his son as a hostage, and with this he was now in the debt of the English king. Malcolm later raided into England again and was welcomed into Northumberland, but William the Conqueror yet again sent forces to deal with him. He even raided during William Rufus's reign, but peace was later restored. However, in 1093, the Scots rampaged back into the north of England, but Malcolm III was killed whilst fighting at Alnwick Castle. Now, following his death, his body was then buried by Robert de Mowbray, and he was interred in a priory at Tynemouth nearby. However, during the reign of King Alexander I of Scotland, 2 corpses were removed from Tynemouth Priory to then be reburied in Scotland in Dunfermline Abbey. The bodies were of King Malcolm III and his son Edward, who died with him. They were then placed alongside the grave of Queen Margaret before the Holy Cross Church in Dunfermline Abbey. But over 100 years later, two skeletons were discovered and found in 1247 during building work which was happening at Tynemouth Priory. These were identified as the king and his prince, and they were then given new tombs within the abbey. But it is not known whether Malcolm's body was given over to Alexander or whether it remained in England undisturbed, as records relating to this are rather sketchy. But then the remains of Malcolm III were allegedly moved by King Alexander III roughly around the mid-13th century, and the remains of Malcolm's wife were also sent to the new eastern end of the abbey. The remains of his wife Margaret had been placed inside of a reliquary, and it was said that this was carried to the high altar past Malcolm's grave, and it became too heavy to move. But Malcolm's remains were buried next to Margaret beside the altar. Over the next few centuries, religious turmoil and upheaval plagued Scotland, and there was a lot of animosity inside of the nation. The eastern end of the abbey was destroyed in the year 1650, and this included the area of the shrine where Malcolm III's wife was buried, and some of the remains of the couple were allegedly smuggled away, even to Spain, where they became in the possession of Philip II of Spain. It's believed that Malcolm's remains were removed from the abbey by Abbot George Jury, as there was a lot of attacks by Protestant reformers, and his actions saved the bodies. The remains of the Scottish king and his queen were then taken to a rural estate at Craigslar before they boarded a ship, and they were then taken to the royal monastery at St. Lawrence, near to Madrid, where they are still left today. During the French occupation of the region by the French during the early part of the 19th century, a bishop of Edinburgh applied for permission from the Pope for the remains to be looked at. He wanted them to be brought back to Scotland, but the remains could not be identified for sure, and with this the case was then left. King Malcolm III ruled for 35 years as the King of Scotland during a very turbulent time in the medieval period. He raided into England a lot, and he left a legacy where many of his descendants would rule Scotland. But his remains were actually dug up, and they were then transported thousands of miles away to Spain, where they allegedly are laid to rest today inside of a monastery in Madrid. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.